Flexbox. It is a CSS layout model that allows us to design more efficient and predictable layouts with minimal code. It makes it incredibly easy to align items both horizontally and vertically, distribute space within a container, and create complex layouts that adapt beautifully to different screen sizes. This is why Flexbox has become an essential tool for modern web development. Today we explore everything that Flexbox has to offer using Tailwind CSS. I will cover things that are not even covered in Tailwind's official documentation. Here are the utilities included in the Flexbox category of Tailwind CSS. I have arranged them based on practical usage, and we will cover every single utility that you see on the screen. Also, I want to mention that the goal of this video is for you to understand the concepts of Flexbox and get the idea on what kind of scenarios you might use certain utilities. I will explain what all these utilities do and how they work, but where to use them completely depends on what you want to build. Just because we know all the utilities does not mean you have to apply them everywhere. You have to understand what utility is needed to get the result you want. So understand the concept first before trying to use it. I will show the code and the result simultaneously on the screen, and hence for this video I recommend that you don't code along. Grab a cup of coffee, sit back, relax, and pay close attention to this video. Let's start with flex direction. Firstly, to make an element a flex container, we have to add the utility called flex in the element. Then we can make changes to the elements inside it. So if you see on the right side of the code, this is a flex container, and inside this we have these 4 items. So if I remove flex from here, this is no longer a flex container and we cannot apply any flex related properties to this. So by default, this is how it looks on the left side. It's vertical from top to bottom. So when we add flex to the parent container, then we can apply the flex properties. And by default, this is the behavior of a flex container. The items inside it will start from left to right. So that is exactly flex row. So even if you add flex row, it's the same behavior because that's the default one. So we are explicitly mentioning that it is a flex row, but it is flex row already. And don't worry about the stylings that I have done in the middle. These are just for demonstration purpose. I've seen a lot of videos where they will just show you some kind of blocks with no content in it. So I just wanted to put some content so you understand what's happening. Whatever we do, the changes will be in the parent container classes, not in the child containers. So don't worry about it. So we've seen flex row now. Let's see flex row reverse. So as you saw, it changed from left to right to left. So now it starts from the right. That's why I ordered the elements in A, B, C, D. So you can see it starts from the right side and it is ending towards left. Now flex call, the same concept but from top to bottom. So we have from top to bottom, Amsterdam, Berlin, Como, and Dublin. Now if we use the reverse, you might have expected, it starts from bottom and goes to the top. So that's all that is there with the flex direction. It just lets us decide which direction the items inside the flex container should be placed. Coming to gap, this is something that I use a lot. It is used to create space among the flex or grid items. We are covering only flex in this video, so it is used to create space between or among the flex items. So on the right side, if you see, we have just a flex container. Inside we have 4 items. If I add a gap here, for example 6, you can see there is a space between each element here. And why 6? It's just the way Tailwind works. In Tailwind, for example, let's take width. Tailwind has a numbering system, like it's a measurement. These are Tailwind units. They start from 0, 0.5, 1, and so on. It goes until 96, and then it has different measurements. So each number has a value. For example, 2 is 8 pixels, and 6 is 24 pixels. So I used gap 6, means it's 24 pixels. And this will create space both horizontally and vertically. You can use gap X or gap Y to create space in a specific direction. Let's see that. Now instead of gap 6, I'll put gap X 12. As you see, there is no space vertically, there is only space horizontally, only in the X direction. Now I'll remove X and I'll replace it with Y. Now there is only space vertically in the Y direction and not in the X direction. If you want in both the directions, then you just need to use gap and not X and not Y. So that's the concept with gap. Justify content. We have several utilities under this category. These are the utilities that we might use every single day in our web development journey. They help us position the items based on their flex direction. I'll explain what is flex direction, but let's see how to use these utilities first. We have a flex container with 4 items in it. This is the default position of the items. Now I don't know why there is justify normal and justify start. The normal is the start position, so those are redundant, but if you want to explicitly set it to justify start, as you saw, nothing changed even if we added justify start. Now let me add justify end. Now you saw all the items as a content together move to the right. Then center, we'll keep it in the center. Then between, justify between will make the elements spread across the container. However, there will be no spacing around the items, but between the items there will be some spacing. And justify around, from my explanation you might have got it, there will be space around the items, including the first and last ones. So there is a space for action on the left side and also on the right side. Same for horror, left side and right side. And evenly, if we use justify evenly, this creates space across the container to maintain equal space between the items and around the items. So that's the difference. And if you use justify normal, it's the default one again. So for this kind of positioning, we'll use justify content utilities. I said I'll explain this flex direction. So whatever we did till now, it works in a horizontal space. Means the centering, the between, everything is from left to right and the changes happen between this space. Now if we add flex column, now the direction is changed. Now it is from top to bottom. So at this point, just for demonstration purpose, I'll make some changes to the item so I can explain how it works in the vertical direction. So now you see there are 4 items and we have flex call, means it is in the vertical direction. Now let's add these utilities to see how this will affect a flex container which has a flex call in it. So as I said, justify normal and justify state, they are the default position, so even if you add them, nothing will change. And use justify end and you see all the items went to bottom, then center, then between. Just like in the normal flex, there was no space around the items. You can notice that in the extreme item there is no space on top of action and there is no space beneath sci-fi. Now I'll add around, and now you can see there is some spacing beneath sci-fi and above action. This is because there is space around this item. And if I add evenly, then we will have even space from the top to the bottom across all the items in that container. So that's what it means by flex direction. When it is flex, it will arrange the items based on that direction. When it is flex call, it will arrange the items based on vertical direction. So that's how it is. Align content. Just like justify content, which justifies the columns in a horizontal space. Align content positions the rows in the vertical space. Obviously, there has to be multiple rows in Flex containers, because if there is only one row, then we don't need them to align. Let's add content center to demonstrate. So I'm adding content center to the Flex container, and you see all the items are in the center now. By default, the Flex items automatically occupy the space available, and hence, though it was only a padding of 4 on top and bottom, it occupied the entire empty space. That's the default behavior. Let's use content end. So the position changed to the bottom, then between, it's on the extreme edges, but only vertically. If you see horizontally, though there is space on the right, it is not aligning them because this is only vertical. If you want them to horizontally also align, then we have to use the justify content utilities. And let's add around now. So there is equal space around the element and evenly. With this, we will have equal space across the container in the vertical direction. And we have two new utilities here, content baseline and content stretch. Content stretch is the default behavior. There is nothing different. And content baseline works as content start. I'm not sure if there are any other use cases for this content baseline. I've searched in the Tailwind documentation, there is nothing else explaining this. I've searched even outside the documentation and I don't see any practical use cases for this. Like not just align content, like in several other sections, we have so many utilities that are not useful or it does the same thing as other utilities. So if you see some special use case for this content baseline, please feel free to comment and I will also know. But from my understanding, if you are getting the output you want with any utility you are using, then we don't need to stress about a utility just because it is there. Align items. These are used to control the position of Flex items inside the main container. As I said in the last section, by default, the Flex items occupy the space available. So the same thing is happening here. Now let me add item start to the Flex container and see how it behaves. See, all the items are now aligned to the top, the starting position. Same way, if you add end, then it will be at the bottom. And if you add center, it's in the center. And there is items baseline. It works similar to item center, however, it is not relative to the main container. Let me show you what I mean. So when you add the baseline, you see the structure did not change, only the position changed. Means it is aligning the items based on the content inside each item of this container. But it is not positioning in the center relative to the container. It is only taking into account the content inside this items. And item stretch is the default behavior again, so we don't need it. I mean, if you remove it, it's the same result. Align self. In the last section, we have seen how to align all the items in a container. Align self utilities are applied to the individual elements inside its container, so we can align a specific item inside the container. So let's say, for example, you want all the items in this container to be center aligned, but you want one particular item to be start aligned. So let me give item center to the parent, that is the Flex container. Now all the items are center aligned, but you want Pokemon, for example, to be in the start position. So for Pokemon, I'll add self start. So you saw now it is positioned at the start. So this is the use case. We want something specific, a single element to have its own alignment. Then we use the self utilities. Now let's add end. End align now, then enter. And we can stretch. This is the default behavior, stretch. And baseline is something which may not work here, because generally the baseline is something that aligns with the content of the element, but since it is the only content, I think it will just go back to its original position as a start. Let's see, self baseline. So yeah, it's just aligning to its original position. If we remove item center, see the text is on the top. If I remove self baseline as well, the text is always there, so that is the baseline for this particular element, so it will always stay there if we use the baseline. So that's self baseline. Flex spaces. These utilities help us to set the initial size of the items inside a flex container. By default, the size is whatever we set. In this case, we set basis 1/3, means 1/3 of the container. However, if something causes to expand its size, it will expand based on the requirement. Here size means both height and width. When we are using flex in the main container, then this basis acts as a width. And when we use flex call, means flex column, then this basis will be used as a height, means it's dynamic. We don't need height and width for two scenarios. We can use basis in both the scenarios. Now here, if you see, we have a code that is not in a single line, it is wrapped to adjust its size. Now if I add text no wrap, then the code will not be wrapped and it is forced to expand its size. See, now all the three elements here automatically adjusted based on the requirement without considering the existing width. Now we have basis auto and basis pixel and basis full. What basis auto does is, let me remove this text wrap. Now we have 1/3 for everything. Let me change to auto, means it will just take whatever is needed. So there is no space between the quote. Here also talk is cheap, here there is some space. Now if I add basis auto, will just take what it needs. So that's what basis auto does. Now let's add basis pixel. This will take the least amount required. So it is squeezing the maximum it can. And obviously basis full will occupy the entire space available. And if we give basis full to everything, then it will just adjust automatically based on the available space, just like in the beginning. So that's basis. Flex wrap. By default, the items inside the flex container will always try to fit in within the container size. If the total width of all the flex items exceeds the container's width, the items will be squeezed to fit within the available space, just like here. I've given width of 96 to each element, but these are not width 96. To ensure that each item retains its specific width, we can use the flex wrap property, which allows them to start in a new line if the width is not sufficient in the current line. Let me show you what I mean. Let me add flex wrap here. Now see, this is the actual width of 96. Since it was not wrapped, it was trying to fit in and squeeze in the same line. Now that I have added flex wrap, the item came to the next line because the width was not sufficient in the first line. And flex wrap reverse will just start in the opposite direction. And flex no wrap is just the default behavior. That's all with flex. It's simple. Flex. These flex properties control how the items inside the flex container can grow, shrink, and also control their basis within a flex container. Let me show you in the examples. There are four, as you can see, four utilities: flex 1, auto, initial, and none. Let me add flex 1 to the first container. Here you see there are three vegetables. It is just occupying the space that I gave, that is width 48. But if I add flex 1, it just occupies the entire space available. So that's the use of flex 1. And for flex auto, let me go to the second flex container. We have 3 items here: asparagus, broccoli and carrot, and each has their specific widths: 48, 64 and 96. If you convert them into ratio, it's 3:4:6. So if we use flex auto, they will expand their width based on that ratio. They expanded, but they expanded in the same ratio. Still, asparagus is the smallest one, broccoli is the middle, and carrot is the largest one. So if you want some items to expand to occupy the full space, but you want them to maintain their original ratio, then you can use the flex auto. Coming to the flex initial, you see on the right side in the last container, I have added flex initial to broccoli, which has width of 96. What flex initial does is, it will never allow an element to grow beyond that specific width that we have given. If there is no space available, it can shrink, but it will never go beyond the initial size, that is width 96. So that is what initial does. Let me add a few more carrots here so that it can be squeezed. See, the width is reducing for broccoli, but it will never go beyond the width 96. So that's what flex initial does. And what flex none does is, let me, in the same example, I'll remove the flex initial now. Now in this scenario, all the items are squeezed to fit because that's the default behavior of a flex item inside a flex container. So if you don't want an item to follow these flex rules, then you can add flex none to that particular item, and it will always retain its width. Means it is not affected by the flex properties that you use in the flex container. So that's what flex none is for. Flex grow. These utilities let your element to occupy all the available space that is there in your container, or it prevents the element to occupy the available space. Let's see how. So on the right, I'm giving the grow utility to the first element in the container. So the flexible element, it's occupying the entire space. Now if I give the same grow utility to another element, it also occupies the available space. Now grow 0 in this case will not show any difference, because grow 0 by default it is not taking any space, so it's like that. But however, to show a use case, I will add grow 0 to the first element, and I'll add hover effect and use grow there. So whenever you hover, it's grow, it's using utility of grow, and when you are not, it's just the normal default element. This is just a use case for you to understand, but just know that grow lets the element occupy all the available space, and grow 0 prevents to occupy the space. Flex shrink, it's exactly opposite of flex grow. The shrink utility lets the element shrink through its width when there is no space available. However, shrink 0, even though there is no space available, it will keep its width. Now by default, the items in a flex container, they shrink automatically. So even if you add shrink, for example, to the first one, you can't see any difference. But if you add shrink 0, for example, to the second one, you see it is occupying the space it needs. It is not shrinking because of the flex. So just like in the last example, I can make shrink, and on hover I can use shrink 0, so you can see the difference. So on hover, it is occupying the space it needs, and when I don't hover, it is shrinking and fitting according to the flex properties. So that's flex shrink. Order, the last set of utilities in this Flexbox video. By default, the items inside flex container are arranged in the order you write the code. However, with order utilities, you can change the order of a specific item. For example, if I want the first element to be the last item, I can use order last, and it is in the last position, and we did not rearrange the code here, we just added order last. And I want the fifth item to be the first element, so order first. Now you might be wondering why order 1 did not work though it is the first position. Let me explain that. I'll remove this order first and order last. So whenever you add order with a dynamic number, let me add for 1 order 5 or order 3. So I want the first element to be in the third position, but when I save it, it goes to the last. You know why? Whenever you add a specific number to a particular element for order, all the remaining elements will have the order of 0. So even though we didn't write, by default it is taking the order of these elements to be 0. So if you want the first element to be in the third position, you have to give the order values to every other element. 1 for second element, order 4 for third element, order 5, and order 2 for fifth element. So this way you have the order. You want the first one to be at the third position and all these like this. So if you are giving order to only one item, then obviously it will be at the end because all the remaining items will have 0. And now if you don't want a particular item not to follow the order, you can give the order none. So since you removed order from the third element, it just came to the first position, which is 0. So that's how we can use these order utilities. Now that we have covered all the Flexbox utilities in Tailwind CSS, I encourage you to try them out yourself, experiment with different combinations and see how you can create various layouts effortlessly. And that wraps up our deep dive into Flexbox utilities. I hope you found this breakdown helpful and that you are now ready to create stunning layouts with ease. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more web development tutorials. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, drop them in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. You can also message me on Twitter. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Happy coding.